Are you looking for more success, more wealth, more money? Well, this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast is for you as I chat with Pete Wargent about his 6 rules for wealth creation. And some of them may surprise you because Pete's well known for his charts and his detailed research into the stock market and into property. But there's so much information in this chat that it's going to last the whole show. So welcome to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator, who has once again been voted our leading expert in wealth creation. That's the 5th time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
Investment and psychology. Now, they're 2 words that rarely appear in the same sentence, and it's much the same with business and psychology. And that's rather strange considering that, in my mind, psychology is the ultimate foundation for any sort of entrepreneurial success. So when you master your psychology, when you understand how your financial thermostat is set, and when you grow through personal development, you're going to be able to accomplish fantastic goals. And yet, for most investors and entrepreneurs, psychology is at the bottom of their list of important things to do today. But in my mind, your mindset is critical to your success. You see, most people are motivated to become successful. We want to perform well at work. We want to improve ourselves. We want to experience rich and meaningful relationships. We want success. But how? Now, one of the debates about how to achieve success, whether it's in business, whether it's in your job, with wealth creation, with investment, one of the debates centres around the psychology of success and quite literally how people think about success. Now, in this debate, people ask 2 key questions. What makes a person successful? And what's the mindset of a successful person? Now, generally, people group themselves into 2 categories of thought regarding those 2 questions. Some people answer those questions saying that success is the result of extraordinary talent, of giftedness, of natural ability. This way of thinking is called a fixed mindset. On the other side of the argument, people acknowledge that even though talent's important, ultimately success is achieved by persistence, by hard work and by resilience. By contrast, this view is described as a growth mindset. Well, what's all this got to do with today's show? Well, by the time you finish listening to this week's show, you're going to learn Pete Wargent's 6 rules for wealth creation. And some of them may surprise you, especially when they're coming from Pete, who's well known for his charts and his detailed research into the property and the stock market. Now, for those of you who don't know Pete, he's a chartered accountant, he's a chartered secretary, he's got a financial planning diploma, and over the years, using his long-term approach to building wealth through businesses, investing in equities, and owning a portfolio of properties, he's achieved financial independence. And I know it, I've known him for a long time. He achieved that at the age of 33. Pete's a prolific blogger and someone who's I can call a good personal friend, and someone I think you should follow. Follow his blogs at petewargent.blogspot, and also he regularly writes on Property Update. Welcome, Pete.
Pleasure, Michael.
Now, Pete, you're well known for your charts and your graphs and your research, but I've gotten to know you well, and you've come to Wealth Retreat for the last few years, and you're one of the most popular speakers, and we have our individual chats, and I know that you know the other side of wealth creation, the importance of the psychology. I know you're a keen sports person, but you're very good at your golf and your cricket, and I bet you understand the psychology of that as well. Did you always understand the importance of mindset in wealth creation?
Yeah. I think it's as you said. I do a lot of analysis because that's what I enjoy. But as you always talk about at Wealth Retreat, sometimes people who are overly analytical are also guilty of not taking action. So that's why it's important to balance these things off, because yes, studying and understanding markets and so on is important, but being able to actually use that information, that's a whole other thing. And in terms of whether I've always understood it, well, probably not, because I think when you think about the psychology of wealth creation, and they say, well, it starts when you're born. Because when you are born, you have no context, no other context other than the people you're spending time with. And as I've talked about it in my books, and I grew up in a young offenders hostel because my dad was a warden, and that was my environment. So probably it came to me later in life that actually you do become the sum of the people you spend time with. So yeah, it didn't come until much later for me.
I guess it's an important point that our mentors, our models when we're young, are our parents, and it's things you heard, things you've experienced, things you've seen, and sometimes the things you haven't heard, and they don't talk about money or they don't give the good impressions. But these powerful messages end up creating your habits, your feelings, and the way you think, and that leads to the way you act, and that ends up with your results. So I know you've written a blog a while ago that attracted my attention about the 6 rules of the psychology of wealth creation. So maybe you could go through those with us, please.
Yes, I think that the first rule is linked to that, and it's related to self-esteem. And I know you talk often your lectures at Wealth Retreat and in your books about the financial thermostat. Well, it's kind of the same idea, really. I mean, as you know, it's very difficult to charge for your own time if you don't value yourself. But also as an investor, if you achieve a level of net worth that you're not comfortable with, then you're at risk of sabotaging it. And I'm as guilty as anyone myself. I look back where I was aged 30 and dare I say it, 40 today. I sometimes can't believe how far I've come, but that's one of the reasons that I like property and other long-term investments. There's far less scope for making silly decisions if you've got a long-term outlook.
Well, Pete, I think one of the messages is that can change. So therefore, you can change the way you think about yourself. You can change your habits. You can upgrade your financial thermostat. And that's through personal development. And to be honest, it took me a while to learn that too, because I sabotaged the first half of my life because I don't think, I didn't have the self-esteem I have today. But we're taught not to be vain and not to boast. That's a very, very different thing. You've got to feel good about yourself, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. So there was a very famous trading psychologist, Dr. Alexander Elder, and he always talked about self-sabotage being a curable disease. But in terms of how you actually go about, I mean, it's all well and good saying, well, don't sabotage yourself. But as you said, it's an ongoing development. And I think it's more of a journey rather than a destination. But in terms of how you build your self-esteem, well, it's through experience, credibility, and I think particularly recognizing your successes. And one really great thing I picked up this year at Wealth Retreat from a good friend of yours, Tom Corley from the States, is to keep a victory log of your great achievements. Because I think people, we're almost hardwired to remember our failures and rejections in life, and people don't put enough emphasis on the great things that they have achieved.
I think you're right there, Pete, that it actually is a hardwired, it's a survival mechanism. You're scared of being eaten by the next saber-toothed tiger when you're wandering the deserts, years ago. So it is a survival mechanism. So rule number 1 is increase your self-esteem. And there's a number of ways of doing that by personal development, by hanging around the right people, just affirmations in my mind and saying I'm good, I'm beautiful, I'm fantastic, I'm owed money. That doesn't work enough. You actually have to do something. Rule number 2, Pete.
I think the second rule is to take a long-term outlook. I think with the internet in particular, it's become more and more common to see commentary on sort of daily prices and weekly trends and so on. And as a commentator, I'm as guilty as anybody else of that. But personally, my time horizon for investing is a long one. So yes, showing my age here a bit, but we've got assets that we've owned for well over 20 years now in the share market and in property. And I think a focus on quality over quantity. But yeah, there's the old apocryphal story about, was it the island of Manhattan being bought for the equivalent of $24 or whatever the story was. But
yes.
It just shows the power of compounding. I think more and more people have become focused on the short term. We saw it with Bitcoin, I think it was last year, with the the price going up $1,000 every few days or whatever. And yeah, I mean that will end in tears, and it already is. And I think people who achieve the big results are the ones who actually take a longer term outlook.
Interesting, but I think most of us, I guess it's the greed glands, because you get those emails, I can buy 7 properties in 7 minutes or 10 properties in 10 years, that you're finding the next hotspot, taking shortcuts. So we're lulled into this sense that I can actually do something quickly. And it is a generational thing. I think the younger generation expect that a little bit more. Maybe that's coming from somebody who's a bit older. But Warren Buffett said it really well too, didn't he? He had a famous quote about, if you're not going to be prepared to hold a stock for, I can't remember what it was, 10 or 20 years, you shouldn't hold it at all.
He did, yeah. I'm trying to... there's one of my followers on Twitter is always keeping an eye out for the overuse of Warren Buffett quotes, so I better try and minimize those. But yeah, he's absolutely right. And you know very well from your work as an advisor how difficult it is when markets are soft to get people to invest. But when the market's red hot, people are stamping the door down to get into the market. But it's that it's human nature. We feel much more comfortable following the herd than we do going against the grain.
But the herd's usually wrong, Pete, isn't it? When you look at the results of people who invest in property, the statistics show 50% sell up in the first 5 years. Those who stay in, most never get past their second investment property. But let's go back to this overuse of Warren Buffett quotes. I'm not worried about that, because I like your rule number 3, that you should study and counsel with wise men. And who better than one of the smartest investors of all time?
Well, for sure. Now, I think when that phrase was written, study and counsel with wise men, I think we should say that in today's more modern era, that would be wise men and women. But it's, yes, I mean, it just goes back to that thing. If you're the sum of the people you spend most time with and the people you learn with, then, actually listening to people who've been there and done that is very important. This is not just a platitude, I should say. This is something that we're actually doing. You are, I do myself. For a bit of fun, I had to think back of the people I've mixed with or had coffees and lunches with over the last few months. Spoke to Alan Kohler yesterday. Did a presentation with Melissa Brown, who you know. I'm having lunch with Michael Pascoe next week. I've also caught up with John Hempton, Peter Thornhill, spoke to Scott Pate the other day. Now, that's not name dropping. That is me increasing my financial intelligence, because if you speak to people with brains and success levels like that, it can only have a positive effect on you. And that's one of the reasons that I keep coming back, of course, to Wealth Retreat, just to give you a plug there. But good things happen when you mix with like-minded people.
Definitely. Now, that doesn't mean you leave all your old friends behind, but it is important, because if they just talk about Game of Thrones or what's latest on Netflix, and they don't actually talk about how to increase your wealth and how to think like a wealthy person, because the average person talks about the greedy rich people and dirty money and filthy rich, and so you get the wrong message. So rule number 3 is study and counsel with wise men and women, and what you then do is you model them. In other words, you do what they do, but more importantly, you've got to go a step or two deeper. You've got to think like they think. So you've got to unpack it and understand what they think and develop rich habits, success habits, as opposed to the poor habits. Because most of what you do all day is unconscious. It's at a subconscious level. You don't even realize it, do you, Pete?
No, that's exactly right. And that's part of the point of what this whole this blog post and then what this podcast was all about. Is actually a lot of this stuff goes on at the subconscious level as much as it does in the conscious.
Okay. Now, your rule number 4 doesn't surprise me. It comes from all the money and wealth books going way back almost a century to The Richest Man in Babylon. Pay yourself first. But most of us don't do that, do we, Pete?
No, I think it's as much about what people focus on. I think a lot of people have a focus on survival, the next paycheck. But if you look at all the greatest businesses, the greatest business people, the super wealthy, they will always focus on, as you said, in inverted commas, pay yourself first. But it's it's really about doing what you call the A activities, doing the things that will benefit you first. And yes, not so much a focus on survival. It's more about doing what's going to actually create value for you in the future. And that sort of rolls into this whole idea of like spending less than you earn. It doesn't matter if you're, the wealthiest person on the planet or one of the average types of person. If you spend more than you earn, then you'll ultimately fail.
Well, you're always owing people money. So I think the message is spend less than you earn and then save that difference and over time invest that money. And then going back to one of the other rules, let compounding and time and leverage do its job, because you've got to get yourself an asset base. That's the job. Whether the asset's with shares, whether it's with property, if you can set up your own business, that doesn't matter. So that's an important rule. Okay, going together with that almost is rule number 5 that you've written about, and that's controlling your expenditure.
Yeah, I think, it's almost tied in with the previous rule, but the wealthy do control their expenditure. That's not to say that they don't spend money. They do, but they spend money particularly on investing, also on self-improvement, and anything else that will increase their future wealth. So going back to your old friend, Warren, famously driving a second-hand car because he understands the power of compound interest. Now, whether or not that's a true story, the point is valid, and that's the wealthy. They do spend money, but they control what they spend it on.
I guess part of that also is you see other people driving expensive cars or living in expensive homes, but you don't always see the debt that comes with that, and the fact that while they may look wealthy to impress people who don't really care, as they're earning more, they spend more, and it's not those sort of material things that are important. It really is building an asset base. Now, you and I both know, Pete, that true wealth hasn't got to do with how many properties you've got or how big your share portfolio is. You need your health and you need your friends and you need the ability to grow and learn and the ability to give back to the community. But if you're talking money-wise, you've got to actually spend less than you earn. You've got to control your expenditure and you've got to avoid buying things on credit, because the money on your credit card limit isn't actually yours, it's the bank's, and people are spending too much time using that up for consumables or for things that depreciate in value. Now, I like your point number 6, because it's lovely having all this theory, but you don't get paid in this world for what you know. You get paid in your job, in your consulting and whatever, because of the actions you take, what you do with what you know. So your last point, Pete, is to take action.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't need to tell you this, Michael, because you've seen it with enough clients over the years. The people who succeed are the ones who actually do and actually take action. I was reading a blog the other day by a chap, Dave Gow, who you'd remember. He did your mentoring course many years ago.
Yes.
And he's got a blog now called Strong Money Australia. And he wrote a blog called Perfection is Our Enemy, which I thought was a pretty good, very good summary of really what this point is. And that's that, perfection is a dream that you only see when you're looking back in hindsight. And people are always waiting for the right time to take action, the right time to do something, but it never comes. And the people who actually succeed are the ones who just get on with it. I can give you a personal example here. Just thinking back to when I wrote my first book all those years ago, and I kept tinkering with it and editing it for about a year. And I just kept saying, I've just got to wait until I've got just a little bit more credibility. Because at the time I was a bit younger and I had 5 investment properties at the time. And I was mainly in Sydney and the UK, around London. But I was saying to my wife, Heather, I'm just going to wait just a few more years until I've got a bit more credibility before I actually get this book on the shelves. And Heather actually just forced me to get it published. And that book was ranked in the top books of the year by Dymocks and Money Magazine.
Yes.
And it's just a good example. The time will never be right. You've just got to take action.
So what holds people back, I think, is the fear of failure, the fear of losing money, what other people will say. There's that imposter syndrome where you think I'm really not good enough and what right have I got to do this? So I think it's the fear of failure that's one of the big things that stop people, whether it's in investment, whether it's in business, whether it's relationships. But Pete, I'm a real success at failure. I know that when things go wrong, I just get up once more. It's what's spurred me to move to the next level. And I know it's what spurred you, because we've all had our share of failures in our business, in our personal lives, in our investments. But it's those who get up one more time and take action one more time that make it through, isn't it?
Yeah, and you touched on a really good point there too about the fear about what other people might say, because I had this when I went out and set up my own business, when I published my first book, when I did my first TV and media, and I spent so much time worrying about, people will say, you shouldn't be doing this, that, and the other, and a lot of wasted energy, because as you know, people did go ahead and say all those things, and it's not time well spent worrying about what other people will think. You've just got to focus on what gets results for you, and actually just get out there and take action. And as you wisely counseled me all those years ago, well, it gets easier over time. The first time you get these setbacks, it hurts a bit, but the second time a bit less, and over time you just build more resilience.
Definitely. I think that's one of the traits of successful people. I know it is. And that's resilience, because what's not talked about in the blogs and in the books and the podcasts about success is that it's actually not easy, Pete. It's hard in today's world to compete in business. It's hard in today's world to get the right investment property. It's hard in today's world to get good relationships. You've got to keep working hard at it, don't you? So 6 great points, Pete, in our session today. Number 1, increase your self-esteem. You've got to feel good about yourself. Number 2, invest for the long term in whatever medium of investment you do. Wealth creation is the transfer of money from the impatient to the patient. I had to get a Warren Buffett quote in there, Pete. Study and counsel with wise men. Get mentors. Join mastermind groups. Learn from other people. Number 4 was pay yourself first. Number 5 was control your expenditure. Those sort of go together. But the most important one is take action. That's a great number of points, Pete. Thank you so much. And I look forward to having you back again shortly on another Michael Yardney podcast.
Pleasure. It's always good fun. Just on that 5th point and controlling expenditure. Did I say at Wealth Retreat this year you're driving a new car, Michael?
It hasn't been delivered yet, but it's about to come. So I think that's one of the things you earn when you've built yourself a big asset base. Wealth has now come to me after being more cautious for a long period of time. But I think the other thing is one does have to enjoy the journey, Pete. So therefore you can't, delayed gratification is one of the other things that probably should have been on your list somewhere there, because it is important to know when to hold back so you think of in the long term. But if you don't enjoy the journey along the way, then it's hard. The destination is not going to be anywhere near as fun.
Well, that's it. If you don't enjoy the journey, what's the point of it all? But it's so true.
I think you've also got to reward yourself along the way. So when you've had successes, you've got to reward yourself. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean with a big car, whether it's a night out with your life partner or something like that, but little rewards along the way make you feel good too, don't they?
They certainly do. Pleasure to be here, Michael, again.
My pleasure. Thanks, Pete. Well, that's almost it for another show. But before we leave, I'd like to read out a review left by Himanshu on iTunes. Gave me a 5-star review. Thank you so much. He said, awesome. Hi, Michael. I'm so addicted to your podcast. I just can't wait to listen to it on Tuesdays. Your podcasts are so informative. I just can't thank you enough. And I've also made an appointment to catch up with Ken Race. Looking forward to seeing you guys soon. Well, thank you so much. And I can't wait till Tuesdays when I do these shows as well. I have lots of fun doing it. And I really appreciate it when you help pass the message on so other people can get benefit as well. So please leave me a review. And when you do, like you mentioned, send me an email to michael@metropole.com.au and I'll send you any of one of my books as a gift to say thank you. And if you could pass the message on to some friends through iTunes, through Twitter, or just tell them about the show, let's pass the message forward and get as many property investors educated about finance, about money, about the world, so we can make it a better place. I look forward to catching up with you again next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property advice. If you got value from today's show, we'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review, and we'll read it out on a future show, and Michael will gift you one of his books as a way of saying thank you. Just go to michaelyardneypodcast.com/review and let us know what you think. If you don't already subscribe, head over to iTunes or your favourite Android app. You'll find us there as Michael Yardney Podcast. If you'd like to gain instant access to the show notes, head across to michaelyardneypodcast.com. Watch out for our show next week. You'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes.